Did you know
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
rumors. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom tonight. Boris Johnson formally stepped down as an MP this afternoon after accusing Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish in an escalating feud between the two politicians. And that comes after the Prime Minister claimed Mr Johnson had asked him to overrule checks for House of Lords Honours nominations. Boris Johnson is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on the list, despite being nominated by him, including Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams, among those whose names are absent. Rishi Sunak said the overruling vetting committee wasn't something he wanted to do.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises with people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
In other news today, a man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon John Rainey is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and has been remanded in custody. Humza Yousaf has said he sees no reason to suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. But SNP parliamentarians have called on the former First Minister to resign the whip after she was questioned yesterday by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge and insists she's innocent of any wrongdoing. In the United States, the former President Donald Trump landed in Miami, Florida this afternoon. He's due to appear in court tomorrow. Mr Trump faces charges of mishandling classified documents as he's accused of allegedly unlawfully keeping US national security documents and then lying to officials who tried to retrieve them. Despite the former president's legal battles, his popularity among Republican voters is still high. Opinion polls are showing him far ahead of his competition for the presidential nomination. And it was a sea of blue in Manchester this evening as Manchester City fans took to the streets to celebrate their treble victory with a victory parade. Rain and the threat of thunderstorms didn't keep thousands of fans away from the city centre, celebrating after Man City secured the Champions League trophy with a 1-0 victory over Inter Milan at the weekend. So they've added now the magic third trophy to their Premier League title and the FA Cup. The fans in Manchester tonight ecstatic. Congratulations to them. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans. Joining me tonight, Jojo Sutherland and Nick Dixon. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you?
Very well, Simon.
It's been a while.
It has. I've been gallivanting.
Have you? Mm-hmm. It's very nice of you to add us to your itinerary.
Thank you for having me.
You have been very much at home.
I've been doing whatever the opposite of gallivanting is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remain evangelistic.
Levanting.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at Tuesday's front pages. The Daily Mail has a vision of Keir's Britain, which is Just Stop Oil and a lot of migrant crossings by the look of it, not very dissimilar to the current one we're living under with the Tories. The Guardian, outrage as woman jailed for abortion after legal cut-off. The Financial Times, MPs to grill city watchdog over O'Day investigation, and Silvio Berlusconi there, R.I.P. The Times, ex-PM was not told he had obeyed COVID rules. The Independent, Boris, I didn't ask PM to bend honours rules. He's talking rubbish. And the Daily Star, UFO crash hushed up by the Pope. Same old, same old. Those were your front pages. So we begin with the Metro Jojo and all-out war.
Well, first things first, I had no idea that when you resigned as an MP that you got to shower peerages onto people. I didn't know that was a thing.
I think that's his ex-PM peerages, aren't
Oh, is it
they? I
ex-PM?
think
It's not
so.
everybody. Right,
Yeah,
OK.
No, I don't think so.
It just reminds me of sort of like quiz shows when everybody gets a shout-out at the end.
Yes.
Just like, here's all my friends.
All come showering down from the ceiling, yeah. I think we heard quite a few from Liz Truss as well recently as well, though. I'm not
Oh,
sure,
did
but
we?
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
OK.
I don't know whether it's like
Easy done,
whether
isn't
it's
it?
index linked or depends on how long you stayed or whatever.
It's quite a normal thing, yeah. I only know about it because I do a podcast with Toby Young and he's been desperate to get one for ages. But
Oh, right, OK.
sorry, Toby.
But there's a whole thing now because, well, Nadine Dorries is cross and she's resigned and she didn't get one. And, and then, so there's all the kind of the conflict that is obviously massive and really important that...
And I suppose what matters really is whether or not it is Johnson kind of teeing up himself for leadership. You know, do you think he's going to come in as a king over the water? What do you reckon?
Well, who knows? Yeah, I mean, well, the issue was that Rishi apparently got rid of his peerages like that he wanted to give out, which is obviously a bit of it's an inflammatory thing to do. But yeah, the question is, can Boris come back? Can he, or will he start some sort of other party? It kind of seems unlikely, but you wouldn't rule out anything with Boris, would you?
I've seen serious commentators now discussing the possibility that the Tory party, as we know it, could be finally falling apart. Of course, this is exactly why Cameron called the referendum in 2016, but...
Well, he didn't want to get his hands dirty with it, did he? So,
no.
I remember the Michael Howard years were very desolate for the Tories, and you thought then they can't carry on. But now you really do question it. There seems to be such a clear divide between the sort of the wets, if you like, and the Brexit wing. Although Boris seems to be able to sort of traverse it, we never really know what his real views are. But he is now obviously tied with the Brexit wing because he achieved Brexit.
Well, there are people. I mean, I've seen people saying that if they don't create some kind of fairly hard right, or at least traditionally conservative type of party, then the Tory party, such as it is, will just drift further and further left until you will just be...
Well, there's still a huge fan base for Boris Johnson, and maybe that's what he's trying to do, is to just keep destabilising it and create divisions, and then come back riding on his white charger to reclaim the
join
party.
up with Nicola. What do you think about that?
Well, hello, wouldn't it?
Nationalist parties.
She'd probably be in jail, though, so it might be tricky.
There could be a whole bunch.
If you'd have bet on which one was going to be in jail, you would have said
Well, you
Boris,
wouldn't.
wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Trump,
Well, you could have...
Boris, Nicola.
Yeah. All of them.
Jacinda.
Why don't we just jail all of them and start again?
We move on to The Guardian, Nick.
Yeah, this is a shocking story. So they've gone with outrage as woman jailed for abortion after legal cut-off. And The Guardian has very much gone with the outrage about the sentencing aspect. But, of course, there is the outrage, or should be outrage, about the whole thing. So BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, sent her these pills in the post, which was completely irresponsible medically and legally, because it's dangerous, but also she could have faced life imprisonment. Now, she lied to get them. She said she was in the first trimester, so that's also very bad. But they sent her these pills. She had to deliver the baby stillborn, is apparently haunted by its face, as you can imagine, and has deep remorse, which must have been absolutely horrific. And the question is, so BPAS now, though, are saying it's shocking and appalling, this sentence. So they're sort of doubling down in order to distract from what they've done, which is an extraordinary sort of medical malpractice. See, I don't know if I can legally say that. That's my opinion. And so, you know, this is a baby at 32 to 34 weeks, and people have been posting babies online that were born and survive at that time. So BPAS just doubling down, saying, well, you should be allowed to do abortion up to this point. Obviously, you shouldn't. Obviously, that's horrific.
Well, if you're going to have a law at all about it, I mean, it's such a tricky one, isn't it, abortion, because we pretend like... I mean, we have a fairly functional system in the UK, broadly speaking. It doesn't arouse anything like the same sort of divisive...
No, and I mean,
it does in America.
It's such an emotive issue.
But it is, I mean, it's emotive for a very obvious reason, because, you know, at this point, you've basically...
And you can only guess that the woman that, you know, has gone to these lengths to do this, and yes, she's broken the law and there are, you know, rules in place for a reason because of, you know, births do become viable.
But was it under...
But it is that thing where you kind of go, it should be... I don't know where jail sentences come into.
It did happen during lockdown,
if it's a human that can survive, that is murder. So that's that.
Yeah.
You can argue what weeks where it becomes murder. When obviously certain people say at any point, but when it's 32 to 34 weeks. I mean, there's no other argument.
It's a very viable birth. But, I mean, I do have sympathy as well. It's a very, very difficult case because she has essentially transgressed a sort of understood
Yes,
a
no,
taboo as
and
much
like
as
you're
a
saying,
crime, isn't
it is murder in the court of law. But again, a lot of people, there are mitigating factors against murder and mental ill health, which is clearly
she's obviously felt desperate to do it, and it's very sad she's got into that position, and she's had terrible advice from BPAS, and terrible that they sent her these pills without checking. By the way, they didn't do any kind of examination; they just sent them in the post.
So you're right. I mean, the Guardian have framed it very much as though this is an outrageous sentencing thing, but I think it's going to carry a certain amount of the population with it.
And absolutely. And did BPAS not get any? Is there no repercussions for them in terms of that they've just medical malpractice?
Yeah, I don't know. There certainly should be. From this, it doesn't seem there is. But they should definitely. They are largely, I say, equally responsible, at least. Yeah.
Well, it's like handing someone a gun, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, assisted suicide discussion going on in a similar sort of frame, possibly. Financial Times, Jojo, Berlusconi on the front page there.
Yeah, I don't quite get this. I need my glasses because this is small print. Seat of power, Berlusconi dies at 86, leaving big questions for Meloni's right-wing coalition. But there's big questions about Berlusconi at the time, and has, been premier, been jailed, been found to be, corrupt. So in terms of...
He wasn't a member of her coalition as such, was he, at that point? He's retired now, isn't he?
He was part of the Meloni coalition, but I don't know how active he was. But he certainly wasn't until very recently.
He was leading a party within the coalition?
He was part of Meloni's coalition, wasn't he, or his party?
Right, OK. Oh, I didn't realise that. God, 86. Well, that's encouraging for Biden then, isn't it?
Yeah.
How
old is Biden?
He's sort of, look,
79,
the Guardian were trying to call him a proto-Trump. I think the fairly superficial comparison, mainly the level of tan, I think, is what they've gone with. I think Trump's a more serious figure, despite superficiality.
I agree, but I have always said, and possibly this is, I might be getting into hot water myself, I've always thought that that's what foxes people with Trump, is that he looks like a conventional Northern European politician, but he behaves more like a Southern European politician. He's much more in the Berlusconi mode, or if he was a hot-blooded Spaniard, people would probably accept that
But I'm not quite sure.
Upgrades.
Big question for Meloni's coalition now, but he's gone. So
what's quite funny, they talk about sort of inviting escorts to his party, his mad parties, all his outrageous behaviour, and then it says, but there was a darker side. That's already the stuff.
Well, I suppose the darker side is actual corruption rather than just sort of jacuzzi parties. I mean, it's all part of the mix, isn't it? But so is the question they're saying whether her somebody else will now lead the coalition, and that will...
Yeah, I think it throws off her very delicate coalition because, Italy's all about delicate coalitions. You've got 13 parliamentary parties or something.
It's a good question for people who seem to be terribly fond of proportional representation as bringing in more stability and functional government, because I just don't buy it, personally, and for exactly this kind of reason.
I think they'll find a way around it.
I sort of agree, though. I was talking to Richard Tice about this on my podcast, and he said that actually most...
You got a podcast?
Yeah, it's very good. Most countries don't have our system, of course, first past the post. No. Apparently it's us and Belarus, so we're used to it, but most, Europe has proportional representation.
We should probably have some twinning exercises with Belarus, if that's the constituencies. The Daily Star to finish off.
Yeah, this is the big one.
Oh, this is for you.
Yeah, UFO crash hushed up by Pope. And I, for one, am sick of this kind of corruption. So I don't have the full story here, but I can tell you that a UFO that crashed in Italy almost 100 years ago, Berlusconi may be involved with this as well, was hushed up by none other than the Pope, says ex-US Air Force intelligence chief, and they've gone with ET phone Rome, and you can see what they've gone there. They've sort of worked in the picture of ET in a Pope's hat, and that's essentially it, Simon.
Is there not, though?
Without the full article, we don't know how deep it went. What was the Pope doing?
I have one or two friends who have got a bit of an interest in this kind of stuff, I would roll my eyes. Yeah, not the Pope, but, UFO stuff. But they have been some revelations lately that have been slightly harder to just dismiss as utter bat.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this seems to be the new distraction, doesn't it? That the aliens are beginning to land.
You think it's a psyop?
Well, I don't know what it is, but it seems very clumsy for advanced human or advanced technology and everything to come over here and just absolutely muck it up at every turn.
There's a lot. Yeah, the Pentagon is saying
they're not that great, are they?
Right, the Pentagon is saying they have UFOs. Tucker Carlson says ex-military people told him that. Yeah. And you've got all this evidence. You've got Bob Lazar documentary, very convincing. At the same time, the fact that the government's saying it, or the state, makes you think it's not true immediately.
Yeah. I would like to know what is going on. That's all for this section. Join us in part 2. We will talk sturgeon row, getting menopause in proportion, and the world's near universal dislike of women. It all adds up. See you shortly.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans. I'm joined by Jojo Sutherland and Nick Dixon, and we kick off part 2, Jojo, with cranky news. The Independent says Nicola Sturgeon will not be suspended, despite that being her favourite treat.
Yes.
Between the arms of two grown people. You know what I mean? Like
I got it. When you explained it, I got it.
Yeah. If you've got to explain a joke, it's not funny.
It's a visual, really.
No, I know. It's, St. Nicola, or Chief Mammy, as she was calling herself throughout the pandemic. Her fall from grace is... do you know what I love about things like this is when Operation Branch Form is what it was called, and I don't know, it's all about some caravan she's bought, or a motorhome, or...
Right. The luxury caravan.
The luxury, but... You know, I mean, is a camper van ever or motorhome ever luxury?
In Scotland,
yeah, a roof over your head is luxury in Scotland. So it's the thing is whether she should lose the party whip. And I think it's been said before, and, you know, she was very keen, and she has always been, you know, to tick everybody off and tell them what to do and remove the party whip left, right and centre.
And it is traditional when a leader of the SNP leaves, they are arrested and then they...
Yes, that always happens. No, it is. There is. She's just following in her predecessor's footsteps. It's kind of, you know, we've started it. So, I'm dying to know what Yousaf's going to get up to.
I keep calling him Yusuf Islam. That's Cat Stevens, isn't it? You have to be very careful. Hilda Yousaf, who is a... I mean, he's quite... He came in initially, we had a sort of sense of him being a slightly overly keen, sort of policing language, that kind of thing. But I don't think he was quite braced for this, was he? This is unexpected territory.
It is. It's back to the old unprecedented, but then it is.
Yeah.
And I think because I think there's again such a division in Scotland, people who absolutely worship the ground that Nicola Sturgeon walks on, and people that are just sick to death of her. And it is that thing where you kind of go, you know, it is too much. It's a bit much, isn't it? Just some leaders just not do things that warrant that you get arrested for it?
I mean, it's obviously an ongoing investigation. We have to be very careful. Yeah. And to be honest, peeling it apart from the obvious Schadenfreude of watching her get arrested and so on, she has been released without charge.
Without charge.
Get ahead of it.
Yeah, all we can say is that they dug up her garden and they found dangerous levels of hubris. That's all we can say for sure. But dangerous quantities. But
the problem they have in Scotland, in my view, just before I get Nick in on this, the problem that I have, or the sense that I have in Scotland, is not just that, as you say, she's divisive, love or hate Marmite, but the state it had that kind of smack of North Korea about it, like nobody could step out of line.
No.
Like the whole of the system, the establishment, much more sewn up than it is in Western.
Yeah, it's horrendous. And I don't see how she's staying, because Boris has gone for reasons I don't totally even understand, whereas Sturgeon's having these 7-hour interrogations by the police. Now, of course, innocent until proven guilty, but it is amazing. She's already imploded even before this. The trans policies alone would be enough to get rid of her, I would say, and it seems to be. But then if you look at the fact that Michelle Thompson in 2015 had to give up the whip, so
she was investigated.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, not dissimilar.
She said she was never personally under investigation and was certainly not arrested, so wasn't even as bad.
Yes, so she was accused
I mean, it's obviously damage limitation, but I think it may be over. Nick, over to the Times now. A great new solution to the GP bottleneck: reroute. That's phone calls to the hospital instead.
Yeah, so it's ambulance team to answer phone for GP surgeries in pilot. So basically, ambulance drivers, their job's not hard enough, so they'll be part-time receptionists just answering the phone.
Team, isn't it? It's not them actually taking the calls in the ambulance. It's not actually ambulance drivers, is it?
Yeah, I think it's slightly misleading, isn't it? So basically,
it's service. It's the switchboard.
It's the call handlers that you have already.
My concern is that they're hardened ambulance people, so they'll be like, "Has anything fallen off? Well, then why are you calling?" You know what I mean?
Broken?
You've got a sore throat.
What colour are they?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're answering the phone while driving an ambulance, that's an offence.
They have obviously got like enormous problems at the moment with the. Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult to tell because I'm 58. I've just reached that age where you start to use the NHS a bit more regularly. So I do wonder sometimes. I've come out of the pandemic and I've seemed to be encountering the reality of the GP surgery a little bit more than I ever did beforehand.
Interestingly, the system is different in Scotland because they have changed the system now, and it does seem to work.
Okay.
That the 111 service.
There's a one number.
There is one number that then it allocates you a time to go to hospital, and it does seem to be much more streamlined.
People will learn how to game it. It's like when you ring up and if you just want to find out whether you can upgrade your phone, but what you have to do first of all is
say that you're leaving. Yeah.
So
you have to pretend, and also the 111 call center, they ask you things like, "Are you breathing?" Yeah. So it'll be quite a long process to get. It'll still be taking ages.
I remember when our babies were little and we used to ring them up every time. Kate was unbelievable, and we was like, "Oh, he's looking slightly flushed," you know.
Yeah, looks a bit peaky.
Guardian now, Nick. Women are worried about the new Bond, but it's not James Bond, sadly. It's the baby Bond.
Oh, okay. So, fair enough.
You jumped
on the. You just got rid of the menopause. Well done, you.
So this is more than 1 in 10 women struggle to bond with their baby, and I'd like to see the incidence of psychopaths in the country. I'm just kidding. I'm sure it's a very serious thing. It sounds unfortunate because they're worried that I should be bonding with my baby and I'm not for some reason. And apparently it's more common than we think. It's 1 in 10, as it says there. And I mean that's pretty much the story. They're saying that it's there needs to be more help for women checking in with them, like your baby, and they're going, well, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
I mean, again, funny I should mention it. Maybe I was pre-programmed myself there, but I do remember we've had 2 kids, NHS in Lambeth as it was then, and I think it was pretty good. I seem to remember quite a lot of sort of emotional well-being checks were being done. Bonding with babies is something that's a bit weird because it doesn't always happen immediately, and that's part of the reason why breastfeeding is good if you can do it. I do remember that.
But I also think
it's the old oxytocin flowing.
I think we're quite bad. as parents that have had children by going, oh, it's the best thing that can ever happen, and you know. So I think sometimes people do feel this pressure that you absolutely have to instantly fall in love with your child, and it doesn't necessarily happen.
No,
you know,
but for fathers, it doesn't usually happen for 15, 20 years.
If ever.
Let's go back to the menopause.
The menopause.
The menopause. Jojo,
you really are
menopause.
trying to get rid of it, aren't you? Well, it's one of those stories again that's slightly frustrating because it's about the fact that there's not as much, you know, the sort of menopause has been in the news a lot and the stigmatisation has been taken away and women are talking about it, whereas with infertility treatment there doesn't seem to be as much understanding or, you know, input. And so
they're two quite different things, though.
They're two very different things. So to compare them and say, oh, that's getting too much and that's not getting enough, is that we need to do something more about it.
I mean, obviously, if you're into the menopause, then that will have implications for whether or not you can have children.
Yes, no, absolutely.
They're similar in that regard, but there's also the other aspects of it.
I mean, Dame Claire Gerarda did actually annoy me. I've got, on the whole, it's not an illness, it's just a process you go through. I'm like, well, lucky you if you just went through it.
Lots of processes are still pretty unpleasant, and they can be mitigated.
And so to kind of dismiss the menopause by way of sort of, you know, bumping up infertility seems like not a really good way to have an argument about it.
And this is, I don't know if this is a feminist point or
like one or other.
But I would say this, I think it's very difficult for women now because they are expected to function like kind of as executives and things in their 40s and 50s.
Oh,
you know, a lot of them have been hustled almost into stressful jobs. You know, expected to keep their end up, do everything, and now, you know, suddenly in 45 you can start to experience all kinds of unpleasant, maybe relatively minor symptoms compared to having a stroke, but it's still, they can be debilitating.
Oh, absolutely, but in terms of, it's like anything, people have different responses to the menopause or to the reaction to it, and some people are iller than others. So.
And let's continue with misogyny, and it is worldwide. It appears to be rife, although Oxfam were mentioned in this article, so who knows?
9 out of 10 people are biased against women. Yeah, so a quarter... See, I do find this interesting. Is that thing of going... So 40% believe men are better business executives, but a quarter believe it is justified for men to beat their wives. Who's admitting to that?
Well, it's worldwide, isn't it? This is the thing. I mean, it mentions Afghanistan.
Oh,
and stuff,
yeah.
You know, the Taliban have come back over.
Nobody matters.
Well, it's pretty much in the Quran. Am I wrong?
Am I wrong? Am I a donut?
Prove me wrong.
I saw that sense. I was like, it's like half of the people in 80 countries believe men make better political leaders. I was like, OK, that's your opinion. 40% believe men are better business executives. I was like, fine. And a quarter believe it's justified to beat their wives. I was like, hang on, you lost me. You lost me at the end there. Yeah.
This is the slippery slope, or is it the foot in the door?
But it is. But again, it's going to that thing of that's people's opinions, not necessarily what's happening in the world, because progress has been made and women are much more in the workplace and much more visible. Even in comedy, as a comedian, I know.
But no, you're talking about the West. This is the thing. This is worldwide, and we have seen, you know, the Afghanistan.
Oh, well, the rest of the world's
knackered. Has gone backwards, and so have many other parts of the world. There's been a backward slide from democracy into autocracy.
But what's interesting is they're saying that this hasn't changed, and they're saying, oh, it's shocking. We keep doing this, and it just goes up, or it stays the same. Because it doesn't work. This kind of social engineering is not working. I mean, look at this. They're saying they're completely off track to achieve gender equality by 2030. What is this, net zero men? Why do we need these targets? It's completely unrealistic. People are just going to think what they're going to think to a large extent, and it just shows that this social engineering has failed.
Well, it also shows...
Women can drive in Saudi now. What's everyone complaining about?
OK, that's it for part 2. Epstein settlements, BBC confronts its liberal bias, and new job opportunities for the over 50s in a couple of minutes. Stay around. We'll see you shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to Headliners. For the third quarter, we have pedo news now in The Independent, Nick, and JP Morgan have coughed up for some of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, if I've understood it correctly.
Yeah, and I look forward to your apology for the language there. But JP Morgan reaches settlement with victims of late paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they can call him that, it's in print. And so, yeah, they've reached a $290 million agreement in principle to settle. And the accusation in the case was that red flags have been ignored, that Morgan knew about Epstein's behaviour, but ignored it because he brought in wealthy clients and he himself was a wealthy client. We've never seen anything like that happen. I can't believe it personally. And so instead they decided to settle rather than have this kind of information come out, I suppose. And it's all got a bit Succession. If you watch Succession with the Cruises, it's all got a bit sort of, the CEO has come out and done a full Tom Wamsgans. And sorry if you haven't seen the show, but he says he was arrested and all the stories came out about all the people he knows. And the reason I remember it is that I was surprised that I didn't know about it before. Which is just, it may be true, but it's a hilarious lie. I was surprised I didn't know about this. It's like, you can't make a Tomlet without breaking some Greggs. That's all I've got to say.
Very good. I don't quite understand exactly how much business Epstein was bringing JP Morgan, because I thought a lot of the sort of shroud of mystery around Epstein was that despite being described endlessly as a sort of wealthy hedge fund manager and so on, it was very hard to actually pin down what the nature of his business was. So now this is suggesting that he was actually conducting some conventional financial business as well as running this island full of...
I love the point you're saying is that, saying he'd never heard of Epstein or his crimes until he was arrested. But the other thing as well, that he hadn't noticed the red flags. I mean, I forget to tell my bank I'm going on holiday to Spain and it immediately goes, you can't have any money. Right. So my bank knows exactly what I'm up to every second of the day.
Very questionable.
So I find it very suspicious.
I do as well. It's also an unfortunate coincidence that the deal they had was called a sweetheart plea deal. That's just, I didn't know that term before, but it's not about the island.
That's a general legal term. Well, they've reached a $290 million agreement, so I think it's obviously fairly clear that people generally agree with you that it was a bit suspicious. Still haven't got anywhere near the bottom of that case, to be honest.
No, why can't we get the client list?
He definitely killed himself. Carry on.
Telegraph now, Jojo. Another false dawn is breaking over at the BBC by the sounds of it.
Oh, yes. So BBC plans to build diverse workforce to fight off liberal bias claims. So there's... I mean, This is the thing that keeps going on, it keeps coming back, is that left-wing will accuse the BBC of being too right-wing, and then right-wing will accuse the BBC of being too left-wing. So the idea to then come up with people, basically, that are poor, I think is what they want to do, that somehow is going to solve the problem. They want more working-class poor people.
Yeah, and they also want to represent a wide range of views and perspectives, and they're saying they want to have a process that ensures they hire those people. Why not just hire them? Also, I suspect many of them are there but afraid to speak out. And for what I've learned speaking to BBC employees is that it's just sort of known that you can't really say this stuff, but everyone knows what your views are, but it's just not really, you're not able to really say it, because everyone knows what the BBC are. They're sort of globalist over nationalist, they're Remainer, they're woke on sort of social issues. Everyone knows what they are, they're pro the COVID narrative. And now Nick Robinson just had this thing where he said that partisan channels like GB News risk causing impartiality problems, as if anyone thinks the BBC is still impartial. It's so absurd. Just today, Carl Benjamin was totally smeared by Mariana Spring on her podcast, and he just listed all the factual inaccuracy of the programme. So she's there as part of BBC Verify to check misinformation, whereas she's producing her own misinformation.
But I mean, my feeling with the BBC, with the news department, which is obviously the most important thing, I mean, certainly if you listen to things like Woman's Hour, if you ever hear those on the radio, or the things that tend to get focused on Front Row or whatever, there is a certain kind of Guardian reader sort of bias. But it's the news department that is obviously most important, and I don't think you could accuse them very often of misreporting or giving misinformation. It's just where their focus seems to fall. It's what kind of stories they tend to kind of, forefront, really.
Did they represent the Leave position fairly? Did they represent the vaccine sceptic position? Did they represent the lockdown sceptic position fairly? I don't know.
Not at all, because
they did terribly well.
No, they absolutely didn't, because there's a lockdown sceptic and there's a vaccine sceptic. Then I was very aware, being on the other side, that it was...
And also, it's quite interesting as well...
Your views were not allowed, because I was asked to do certain things on BBC and wanted to say certain things and was suggested maybe not.
And I also think they have a tendency of almost pantomimically exaggerating the both sides thing. So they will say, we're talking about climate change. We've got in a scientist from the governmental, the meta studies or whatever that say it's definitely happening. And then on the other hand, we will have Nigel Lawson or whatever, who everyone on the left regards as a sort of clown-like figure, rather than somebody who's actually a serious voice against this sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different ways in which they can just subtly, exude a certain amount of bias without ever actually being pinned down.
Yeah, and it's clear they didn't like Corbyn either, so I do accept that some of the further lefties are like, well, they hate Corbyn, and that seems to be true as well. They're sort of, we can tell they're sort of Remainer bias, liberal lefty, but it's not, they obviously don't like the Corbyn side either, or the right. They just like their little weird Metro blob thing.
We're staying with the Metro blob now in The Guardian, Nick, and they're talking about Bridgerton. It's no surprise to learn who the real victims are.
Yes, and they've gone with, why is Bridgerton's race twisting acceptable? The real problem with the show's black fantasy. And I've got to say, buckle up, guys, because it's a Guardian think piece about race, which is, amongst the least things I ever want to look at. But it's got a reasonable point. At first, it starts with the usual nonsense and Guardian nonsense, but it makes one reasonable point, that when you make characters black and wealthy in these historical dramas, you're sort of undermining the struggle. So you've got this so-called colourblind casting, which is never really colourblind in favour of white people. It's never a white Black Panther. It always goes one way, as we know. But
then you say, I mean, that's interesting in itself, because the problem is, I mean, the Black Panther is a recently created entity in itself. Historically speaking, Western culture doesn't have many black people. It has Othello, it has a handful of racial minorities that have recognisable characters leading plays and so on.
And there's the real characters like Cleopatra, who's been very controversial because they've made her black when she wasn't. Then there's also people like Aragorn. There's been a black Aragorn recently, and people say, well, why can't you have it? Well, the thing is, because Tolkien was very specific. It's a specific character. At that point, you just go, well, why can't they all have cars? And it just degenerates very quickly. But this point about black people saying, hang on, so they cast people as black people, but now it's actually undermining the struggle, which is a reasonable point.
Absolutely. if you're going to complain that society has always been biased against black people, then you can't cast the moustaches.
You can't, rewrite history and change the perspective.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Anyway, it's a nice long piece, and it turns out, as I say, that we're to blame once again. Daily Mail, Jojo, and someone wants to know if we are going to be driven by facts and data or sentiment, guilt and lobby groups. Ha, 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 ha.
Race Report author says Britain needs to stop being driven by white guilt. And do you know, this really fascinates me, this thing, because it's getting back to what you were saying about with the diversity and views on BBC, that there is this thing that where people are walking on eggshells and not, I don't think we are racist. I mean, of course racism exists, but I think we've been tackling it for quite a while. And purely by coincidence, for something that we were writing for comedy, we watched an episode of Love Thy Neighbour. And I was watching it, and the language is appalling. Yeah. It really does strike you in this day and age. You go, oh my God.
It's from the 1970s, right?
1972, it was an episode. But actually, the principle of it was that the white family was always coming off bad. Not the woman. Yeah. The man was always coming off badly because he was throwing up these sort of racist stereotypes and using language that was. And the black family were, he was always the fall guy, and it was kind of educational in going, no, this is not acceptable. This is not how you behave. And now to not even have that discussion, it's just you're racist, you're racist, you're racist. Going, can we just talk about it, and can we actually have this discussion? And so I think people are just beginning to feel guilty just at the very thought of things that have happened.
Yeah, of course, this comes from Dr. Tony Sewell. His report said institutional racism was not a real thing. Of course it is, but against white people, as we know. The RAF can say mostly useless white males, they can say. Yeah. If you said it the other way around, everyone would be sacked immediately. And we know white boys are behind in schools and so on. But the thing is, as he points out here, you can't see everything through the race lens alone. And these people who do want to see it that way will never admit that there isn't institutional racism, because everything's always proof of it to them. It's falsifiable to them.
Yes, he's stood his ground well, hasn't he, Dr. Tony Sewell, because he came in for an enormous amount of flack when he published that report. That was in 2021, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. Yeah. And everyone basically felt he'd been got at, didn't they?
Yeah,
essentially.
horrible.
But,
and he's incredibly generous. He even says he thanks the people behind Black Lives Matter, which is strange because it's a terrible movement. But he just says that, but it's gone too far that, to say we're institutionally racist. Yeah. So he's very moderate in his claims, but it still drives a certain segment of Twitter mental.
Guardian now, Nick, and a rare example of an employment opportunity that is opening up to my demographic.
Yeah, older people. I hate to say it, Simon. Older people hired as money mules by gangs as cost of living crisis bites. How bad is the cost of living? Well, it's bad enough that people are becoming money mules. If you've seen the movie The Mule, that's when Clint Eastwood is taking drugs across, state lines or whatever.
This is slightly different. You're not expected to open up your cavities, are you?
Right, and you don't have to stick anything in the back of your pickup. You just have
to... Give us your PIN number.
Transfer money for a gang. Now, and just over 2 out of every 5 instances of fraud are related to these money mules. So... And you can get 14 years in prison for it. Yeah. And the other thing is, you can be an unwitting mule, Simon. This is the worst thing, to be an unwitting mule, where they've just done it and they've basically scammed you, and you thought you were doing something legitimate, but you weren't.
Well, I don't know if I could. Get away with that, to be honest. An unwitting mule.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know if you could do 14 years in prison.
It's nice to know there's options, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But it's sort of money mules can also suffer from a poor credit rating and struggle to get a bank account. So I'm not quite sure how they're then getting them to be mules.
Yeah, but also have 14 years in prison, which I thought was the bigger part. And then it goes, by the way, you might struggle to get good credit. It's like, go back to the prison thing again.
It doesn't sound like a really good opportunity.
But it sounds too attractive as a name, doesn't it? Money Mule. It sounds kind of cool and fun.
Yeah, exactly, like an app. I'll just open Money Mule. And I've got a feeling this is going to be my wife's next excuse when there are massive missing lumps out of our joint account.
I've been muled.
That's it for part 3. In the next and final section, Starmer's howlers and unwelcome attention in the Chinese mall, and fake banks is at an auction. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. For our final section, we have the Daily Express. Jojo, it turns out that Bridgerton is at least more accurate than Keir Starmer's Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Labour embarrassingly fact-checked by Twitter over inaccurate claim about first black MP. So Elon Musk has now got this tweet fact-check verification system, which is actually really noticeable that everything that pops up is like, well, no, this is a lie. Although I always really want to fact-check the fact-checkers. But yes, so the Labour Party sparked a row about transparency in politics after putting out a video claiming the very first black MPs were elected 36 years ago for the Labour Party. So then this was disputed, and then they've gone right back to 1767. The first, according to records, the first ever black MP was elected in 1767, 220 years before Labour's claim.
So that is actually kind of Bridgerton era, isn't it? So it turns out there wasn't complete nonsense. Or there's mixed race, right?
And people are saying, why are you erasing black history like this? Which is interesting. I mean, why are they doing it? Was it just ignorance? And this is the great thing about community notes. It just completely undermines people. And this is why people like the EU and the Democrat Party are so desperate to censor Twitter, because it can just expose nonsense.
Their narrative was the Bernie Grant was the great cultivator of black talent, right? Now, I remember Bernie Grant in the 80s when I used to read the Sun newspaper. He was, that was in the sixth form one block when I was at school. He was the loony Labour left. It was him and Ken Livingstone, and that was Diane Abbott and so on. And there are pictures of him with Jeremy Corbyn and so on. So it's quite interesting as well that Starmer is bigging that up, because they were actually a source of a lot of people that he's had to boot out of the party since, you know, for being far too hard left.
Such a weird claim, is it? It's been 36 years since the first black MPs were elected. So easy to check. And there's been not only James Townsend, John Stewart, Henry Redhead York, Peter McClagan in Scotland. There's been so many. It's like, what are you doing?
Why would you say that? Yeah. But it is interesting now that, you know, because people do like to just take things at face value, that now there are these kind of things in place that you kind of go, no, hang on, straight away you could go, that's not true.
You have to sign up if you want to do it, though. If you want to be a Twitter Notes a fact checker,
I could see you doing it, Simon. I could totally see you correcting people.
The milk monitor.
Dobbing everyone in. Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Times now, Nick, and not all kinds of photo surveillance are welcome even in China, by the sound of it.
Yeah, this is crackdown on Chinese street photography after picture exposed affair. So there was a picture of this executive, and he was with his employee/mistress, and unfortunately this got him and her sacked. And because, of course, people can just take photos of you everywhere. It's a big problem walking around London. You're constantly in people's videos and having to sort of stop and wait for them to film themselves. I find it very annoying and intrusive. I don't want to be in your video.
But you, at least, are not committing adultery.
No, well, not necessarily. But if I wanted to, Simon, well, first I'd have to get married. It's a very laborious process. Then I'd have to do the adultery. Then I'd have to get someone to film it. So it's barely worth it. But
you're several stages away.
Yeah. So so China is saying we must realise that the prevalent street photography has extended into people's private lives. Funny for China to be worried about people's private lives.
Incredible. This is what struck me, is because they're the most photographed people on the planet, aren't they?
But also the most lack of privacy on the planet as well. So,
that's exactly what I mean. But I don't know whether there is any attempt by the state so far to sort of enforce morality. I suppose they wouldn't do that. This man's just been shamed, right? But he's lost his job.
Do you mean in this
particular example? Yeah. What I mean is he's walking around holding hands with his girlfriend that he shouldn't be, and he's been caught by a street photographer. But he would also have been caught by probably hundreds of CCTV cameras and so on. It would have been very easy for him to get back.
But also was that TikTok thing with Philip Schofield with the boy. That was just caught on camera. So people get caught on camera all the time.
The one positive is that the dress she was wearing has gone viral and everyone's buying it.
Well, there we go. There's always, isn't it? Every cloud, eh?
Get the look. Guardian now. Guardian now, Jojo. Auction shenanigans.
Right, OK. So Channel 4 have been criticised over not genuine Banksy on The Greatest Auction. So there's a programme, The Greatest Auction, that they've... basically, there was somebody who said it wasn't a genuine Banksy. They told the producers that. Then the producers said they weren't going to have him on the programme because of time constraints or something. So he feels that he was lied to or stopped from saying that it wasn't a genuine Banksy. And who cares?
Because that would have spoiled...
Exactly. Who cares about Banksy? This is a Nan story, OK?
But this would have spoiled the narrative. That's what they're saying, is it?
Yes, maybe. And then after they said it was a Banksy, then somebody called Silent Bill came out and said it was his.
The only thing I can take positive from this is that Channel 4 are being criticised. That's all I've got from it.
Oh, right, OK. And that
I enjoy that. Yeah, it makes me
good. Well, then that's good.
Thank you.
Well, I know the Banksy thing, I think, is a bit of possibly a red herring, whether or not it's actually a Banksy. The question is whether or not they're trying to create scenarios that they know to be false. But, I mean, that's what the whole of that kind of TV genre is as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But excuse my ignorance, how do you know a genuine Banksy from a non-genuine Banksy? What does he do that makes it genuine?
Well, if you want to make it genuine, you get a certificate from his headquarters. It's called Pest Control. And then they issue a certificate to say whether it's a genuine one, and if you're trying to sell it at auction, you need that.
I told you you'd be good on community notes. See what I mean? Exactly the kind of
wow. I wasn't expecting that answer, Simon. Congratulations. Well done. You win a point.
Times now, Nick. Very long times ago, in fact. Sounds like evolution can go backwards, after all.
Yeah, chicken or the egg. Scientists hatch a new theory. Hatch, Simon, like an egg. So that's what they've gone with there. And basically, the whole point is that they thought that dinosaurs had eggs rather than live... What is it called? It's oviparous versus viviparous. You'll know this, of course. Whether you have an egg or a live-born thing, animal, dinosaur in this case.
Ov is easy because it's like l'oeuf, the French.
Exactly, that's how I remember it. And viv is like life, like beaver. Yeah. Anyway, let's press on with this brilliant story.
This 34-year-old.
Yeah. So dinosaurs are a psyop anyway. Let's be honest. Dinosaurs aren't real. They're there to
confuse
attack Christianity. Exactly.
Yeah.
They're a psyop. We
You're
all know
a young
this
Earth
now.
Christian as well as a Christian.
Yeah, of course. Dinosaurs aren't real, but if they were, because they're always changing it, and here they are again changing it. Okay, they had eggs. Oh, they didn't have eggs. They had live dinosaurs.
Well, that's the thing. Is the general theory has always been, you have soft eggs, then you have harder eggs, and then you have live birth. They're saying there was live birth and then they went back to the egg.
Back to the egg, yeah.
Which is, that is a bit unusual. That's like the arrow of time being
reversed. There was a brief scrambled egg period, but then they went back to, they went back again. That's what they didn't think could happen, but I don't know.
But now we're in danger of losing the chicken and the egg argument, and I think we just need to hang on to things.
That one I can answer that. What came first, the chicken or the egg? It was the egg, because there would have been something prior to a chicken that would have been hatched in an egg, and then it had a mutant that turned out to be a chicken.
See, there you go.
T-Rex came before the chicken. We know those are the same, right? Because they're used in PETA adverts to say you wouldn't eat a T-Rex, so you shouldn't eat a chicken. You seen that?
No.
That's PETA. You know PETA, right?
Why wouldn't you eat a T-Rex?
I know, exactly. Absolutely insane.
It'd be amazing. Then you'd cook it. You'd be like the king of the jungle.
And it would taste like frog legs.
Presumably.
It would taste like chicken, I expect. That's what they always say.
Everything tastes like chicken.
Anyway, our final story this evening, and if this works, I mean, it should be headline news, perhaps, but there is a hitch, no doubt, Jojo.
Is this the key to unlimited clean energy? Scientists beam solar power to Earth from space in world first. So basically, because the solar panels apparently can be a blot on the landscape and are practically useless when it's dark, obviously, that they're now going to fire solar panels up into space so that they can harvest the sun 24/7.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot of effort to go to. If things are a blot on the landscape, there's a lot of other things I would like to blast into space first.
Well, that's a good point, but perhaps for another time. What about? Do you think this could be workable, Nick?
Well, I wonder, like, if England is so cloudy, I wonder if even our space is cloudy. That's my concern.
Yeah.
That might not be scientific, but I do like this.
Our skies are grey all the way up.
That's what I'm thinking. I hope so. But this, the only thing I like about this is it's not the only thing, but it came from Isaac Asimov, as a fictitious idea.
Yeah.
It's now a reality.
Oh, most of it is. But there's a thing. Have you not heard of the Dyson sphere? Well, most of our scientific innovations were created by Asimov or Clarke in stories 50 years ago, and we just gradually get used to them coming through. There was a thing called the Dyson sphere. It's nothing to do with the vacuum cleaners. And he said any sufficiently advanced civilization, when you spot it, the first thing you'll see is that its sun is enclosed in a harness energy harvesting sphere. That's how you'll know there you go. So that's what we're on our way to getting. We're going to be sufficiently advanced. It's very nearly over now, folks. Let's take another quick look at Tuesday's front pages. The Daily Mail have a vision of Keir's Britain. Migrants on boats and Just Stop Oil. Looks familiar. The Guardian, outrage as woman jailed for abortion after legal cut-off. The Financial Times, MPs to grill city watchdog over O'Day investigation and farewell Silvio Berlusconi. The Times, ex-PM was not told he had obeyed COVID rules. The Independent, Boris, I didn't ask PM to bend on his rules. He's talking rubbish. The Daily Star, UFO crash hushed up by the Pope, yada, yada. Those were your front pages. That's all we have time for. My thanks to guests Jojo Sutherland and Nick Dixon. We're back tomorrow at 11 p.m. Andrew Doyle will be joined by Josh Howie and Diane Spencer. If you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Tonight, a small boat special. I've been back out in English Channel today. We'll be asking, was Rishi Sunak right last Monday to talk about the great progress he was apparently making? We'll also talk about Boris Johnson's resignation as a Member of Parliament, and we'll ask the question, can he really stay part of the Conservative Party? And Nicola Sturgeon, arrested and released. What does it all mean for Scottish separation? Is it a happy birthday for Sir Keir Starmer? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. The top story tonight, Boris Johnson has formally stepped down this afternoon as an MP after accusing Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish in an escalating feud between the two politicians. It's after the Prime Minister claimed Mr Johnson had asked him to overrule checks for House of Lords honours nominations. Boris Johnson is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on the list despite being nominated by him. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names are absent. Rishi Sunak says overruling the vetting committee wasn't something he was prepared to do.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to, either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon John Rainey is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and was due in court as well today. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. And it means the total number of people making the crossing so far this year has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. And finally, King Charles has been aboard the famous locomotive, the Flying Scotsman, today, celebrating 100 years of the steam engine. His Majesty's Royal Train was being pulled by the famous engine on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which was celebrating its 50th anniversary. The crew and driver invited the King to stand on the engine footplate as she pulled into the station platform, where well-wishers greeted them. The Flying Scotsman covered at least 2 million miles during its service on Britain's railway network and was retired in 1963. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Back now to Nigel.
Good evening. Last Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak went to Dover Harbour visiting Border Force on what was quite a windy day. This is what he had to say about government policy and its effect on small boats crossing the Channel.
Crossings elsewhere in Europe are up by almost a third over a similar time period, and yet crossings into the UK are down by a fifth. I think that should tell us that something is going on here, and that's the result, I think, of the actions that we've put in place, and there's a range of different actions that we've put in place that are contributing to that.
Now, I thought this was complete and utter nonsense, and this is how I replied exactly a week ago today. Because from Sunday, the weather changes completely. It's the end of the big anticyclone in the North Sea. It's the end of the strong northeasterly breezes. If the forecast is anything like right, from this Sunday, we will have 8 to 10 days of absolutely, perfectly calm weather. We know there are many, many thousands, possibly even tens of thousands, from Dunkirk right the way down west of the Touquet to Burke, waiting to cross. Well, a week on, I thought I'd put that to the test. So very early this morning, we set out from Dover Harbour to find out who was right, the Prime Minister or me.
So the fog has lifted a bit. We still can't see very clearly, but there's Border Force picking up. There's a dinghy. Difficult to tell. There's a few dozen on board. Definitely, they're just being pulled up onto Border Force's boat now. The French escort over here to the left, as you can see, has now turned and is heading back towards France. This is going on at the moment. There's another pickup about to take place a little bit further down the channel. It's been foggy. There are 2 boats that have been spotted. I'd be surprised, to be honest, if there aren't more. And remember, 11 boats came in yesterday. When we get conditions without that northeasterly wind, when we get relative calm, they're coming in just the same numbers they were last year. As for Rishi Sunak saying to us last week that he's cut it by 20% already and he's going to stop the boats, frankly, I think that is for the birds.
And you can hear, Nigel, the Border Force vessel out there still sounding its horn, because that fog has really only just lifted. It's been very dangerous here. You couldn't see more than a couple of 100 metres in front of our boat.
We're on this boat. We've got radar. We've got all the safety equipment for going through the shipping lanes in fog, something these boats do not have. And we've seen a couple of tragedies, and frankly, I'm amazed we haven't seen more.
Well, as predicted, Nigel, it has got much busier as the morning has progressed. We've just come across another Border Force vessel that's picked up not 1 but 2 dinghies full.
Yeah, 2 dinghies escorted, courtesy of the French Navy, over to our side of the channel. And yeah, Border Force picking them up. But more remarkably, and what I haven't seen before, is the other boat with the Border Force vessel, a big catamaran. And apparently 2 of these boats have been commissioned from Scotland at a price of £2 million, and their job, to pick up the empty dinghies. Yeah, £2 million a year to pick up the empty dinghies. Now, surely that job, if it has to be done, which it does, you don't want dinghies just floating off down the channel, surely that could have gone to local Kent people, but no, it's gone to a firm in Scotland.
Well, we can see one of those dinghies that has been cut loose by the Border Force catamaran at the moment as it waits for that other chartered catamaran to pick it up. And in fact, a shot of that shows 2 dinghies that it's already picked up, Nigel. But £2 million is a fairly decent contract if you can get it.
I'm sure the local lads here could have done it for an awful lot less, and they know the waters well. But as you can see, it's a very foggy day, so it's been very difficult to spot some of these dinghies. But I mean, here we are. It's now 9:30 in the morning.
And already we're on about, I'd say it's about 10 boats already. So we're headed for a very, very big day. Rishi, it's a barge full already today.
And our aerial footage showing shots of this Border Force vessel absolutely packed out. Many dozens of migrants on the bow and again at the stern of the vessel. I guess if you speak to anyone that knows the marine environment around here, they could have told you that this was always due to the weather and not due to government policy.
Yeah. This is what I was so angry last week. You know, the Prime Minister arrives in Dover and says, look at me, I'm wonderful. You know, the numbers coming have been reduced significantly, and as we can see from the last 2 days, that is not the case. We've now got normal summer weather, and I would anticipate over the course of the next couple of months, I'd be surprised if we didn't see 10,000 in the next 2 months. But I forgot something. Rishi did present last Monday a magical solution.
But what I am pleased is that we have now not just one barge arriving in a fortnight in Portland, but we've secured 2 further boats today, and then we will work through the detail and implementation of those.
So there we are, 2 barges. Well, that's going to do the trick, isn't it? Because nobody came on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday or Friday as predicted. On Saturday, 87 came. On Sunday, 616 came. Haven't got the figures for today yet. I would expect it to be in excess of 700. So already, just in 3 days, Mr. Sunak, we're a barge short. Oh, and by the way, Mayor Khan, you're going to have to accept a barge full down in the Royal Docks. So what was last Monday all about? Was it all about spin and presentation as opposed to substance? I was pretty angry last Monday with the way that he behaved. I want to ask you, do you trust Rishi? Let me know what you think. Farage@gbnews.com. I don't trust him an inch. He's the biggest spinner in British politics that we've seen since Tony Blair. Well, joining me is Danny Shaw, former BBC Home Affairs correspondent. Danny, the problems of illegal immigration have been going on for a very, very long time. We seemed years ago to be rather more effective at dealing with it.
Well, I think what we didn't have many years ago was the visibility of it. People coming in across the channel on small boats, coming ashore. You know, the very fact that our borders so visibly were being breached in this way. We didn't have that. We had people on container lorries largely hidden from view. There were terrible tragedies, obviously, about that. And also, you had a better functioning asylum system for many years. So you did have claims resolved more quickly, and you did have people deported and removed more quickly. The problem at the moment you have is you've got 170,000 odd asylum applications that are still in the queue, have not been resolved. I think the total number of people who've come across small boats and have claimed asylum since 2018, who've had their claims removed, dealt with, is about 20%.
Yeah.
So 80% of asylum claims since 2018, small boats arrivals, have not been dealt with. So anyone who's wanting to come across will look at that and say, well, I come here, whether my claim is valid or not, I can stay for a bit.
Or you just disappear, as an increasing number of people are from these hotels, you know, quite, you know, much higher levels of people absconding. But Danny, how is it that, and even though, I mean, we used to call the Home Office not fit for purpose more than a decade ago, it's even less fit, it would seem, now. But how is it we were able to remove people more easily a few years ago than we are now?
I think it's partly because the system was functioning better. I think it's partly because we had some agreements with some of our European neighbours, because we were in the EU. I mean, the way to solve this for me is to have sort of a boat ready to go back in the other direction as soon as people arrive. So you come here illegally, you go back in a boat, you go back to France immediately. And that requires an